What's up and welcome back YouTube. Today, instead of talking about Genshin Impact character mastering, I want to talk about gameplay design instead. In particular, surrounding Nilou, which is currently a hot topic as her A1 talent restricts you to only running her with either Dendro or Hydro party members and doesn't really allow you to run other elements. Now, to be honest, I actually think Nilou is quite strong as a character individually. However, the problem is that Nilou team is not very strong, and that's kind of a byproduct effect of the fact that she restricts yourself to only running certain team, aka only with Dendro and Hydro, and therefore it's a part of her problem as well. Without a question, this passive definitely restricts her gameplay a lot. We start to introduce problem like restricting her into running in a team that is not so great. But it's at this moment that Twitter, Genshin, whatever Genshin Impact community decide to say, what do you guys know about game design? Armchair game design developers. I'm sure Mihoyo are smart enough to put this passive in for a reason. Now, of course, they're kind of correct. While I do have some knowledge about game design, like difficulty illusions or just how to lead player in a certain way, I am definitely without question not a professional game designer. And that's exactly why I reached out to a lot of my friends who are actually professional game designer about what is their thought on Nilou as well. And here is what they have to say about the overall design problem around Nilou. Now, I'll have to admit that some of these are definitely my personal opinion as well, and I'll try to separate them as much as possible. But with me making the video itself, certainly there are going to be personal bias. But anyway, as always, before we get started, you guys know it. If you're not subscribed to the channel, which should be, then don't forget to subscribe, and let's get started. To get started, the general sentiment that I got from some of these designer friends that I have was that while Nilou could be a really fun and great character, this passive that restrict her into only drafting Dendro or Hydro teammate really ruined the characters for them and make them really sad. The main problem with this passive is that it limits player decision, or even more importantly, freedom. One of the most interesting and most fun aspect about Genshin Impact is being able to create your own team, putting 4 party member in and creating some kind of unique synergies, no matter if they're really good or really meta or just okay. For example, this is one of the reasons why the Genshin Impact community was able to come up with really strong team like the national team or the freeze team. But even for the casual players, they have to think about how putting characters into their party can help out each other. For example, putting Noelle in just as a shielder, putting Nilou in as your main damage dealer, putting Kazu in for overworld exploration. Players are putting characters into their party for reasons, even in their overworld. With Nilou kind of restricting you to only running her with certain elements, this dramatically limits the player freedom when it comes to the drafting process, which is unfortunate because sometimes player might want to build a team certain way, but then Mihoyo basically say, no. Now, of course, just because a passive exists doesn't mean you have to use it. One of the pretty example is going to be the Luke A1 passive, where it reduces your charge attack stamina cost by 50%. But just because it exists doesn't mean you have to use it. Nobody really do charge attack on the Luke anyway, because it is not that efficient. In the same way that you actually don't have to draft Nilou into a only Hydro and Dendro team. Surely you can draft her with Pyro or Electro characters, but it certainly does feel bad. It feels bad knowing that you're essentially missing out on half or maybe even 80% of the characters, and sometimes could even lead to questions like, well, why am I even going to play Nilou when her passive doesn't even work like the way she's intended to play? And so it is possible to draft her in non-Bloom team, but it certainly does feel bad. Imagine for a second where I'm a Genshin Impact player that trying to draft a team with Nilou, Tartaglia, and Tighnari all together. And sure, this might not be the most meta team in Genshin Impact, maybe a team that couldn't even beat Spire Abyss. But for all I care, this team is fun to me as it has a really cool unique interaction that allow you to kind of destroy enemy from a distance, where you start with a Nilou elemental skills to proc a passive that allow you to convert Bloom into core, switch to Tighnari and apply your Dendro from a distance, and then finally you switch to Child and apply your Hydro from a distance. This essentially allow you to create ore from a distance that will instantly explode and do a bunch of AoE damage, potentially killing multiple enemy if they were strong enough. Kind of like Ganyu but with core instead of cryo charge attack. And for all I care, maybe some people will find this playstyle really fun, kind of like American snipers. But wait, notice how I still have a open slot in this party, so let me put another character in. What about Kazu, as I'm trying to explore the overworld in Genshin Impact, and Kazu I heard is a really good exploration character since his elemental skill allow you to do something like a double jump or just reach greater height. But you actually can't do that because that will ruin the passive on Nilou, and that will make it so that you can't can't do that sniping core thing anymore. So unfortunately, we can't do that. Maybe I am doing something more casual, like exploring Liu, and I want to get some material from Liu to upgrade some of my character like Xiangling. So let's put Chi-Chi in, because I heard Chi-Chi has a really amazing passive that allows you to find material easier. It will display the unique location to Liu on the minimap for me, so it allowed me to hunt resources a little bit easier. Oh wait, once again, I can't do that because that just completely ruined my overall team idea. It is not even about trying to draft the most meta team, trying to draft a, ridiculously OP character like Bennett into your party. I'm just trying to have fun by putting the characters I want to put into the party. Imagine as a player where two of my most favorite characters are Keqing and Nilou. How would you feel if you just weren't able to draft them together? You really like Keqing and you really like Nilou, and maybe want to put them into a team together. But by doing that, by putting your two favorite characters together, it ruined the characters. Of course, the passive is one of the way Mihoyo kind of want to step its game up a little bit and challenge the player to kind of think outside the box. Essentially, it is a way of Mihoyo saying, okay, what if you can only run Nilou with Hydro and Dendro characters? How would you then approach the problem instead? How would you change your team drafting thought process a little bit to make sure you can utilize these characters? Once again, you don't have to use it. You can draft Nilou in something like a vaporized team or a national team. But if you want to bring the most out of the characters, you gotta think about how you can draft these characters together. It certainly does overall changes the approach player take when it comes to a presentation like this, and apparently it is a standard game design principle called AMD framework, and it was something that I didn't understand at first, so let me kind of explain it and summarize it. Mechanic dynamic aesthetics is essentially a way of controlling how the player feels when it comes to approaching the game that you have created. At the end of the day, aesthetic is the only part that player really care about, because you want the player to feel good when it comes to playing your game. It doesn't matter how challenging you make your game, it doesn't matter how easy you make your game. The most important part when it comes to a well-designed game is the player have fun doing it. After all, that's why games are made, and that's why the aesthetic part is actually the only part that actually matters. But you can't really control how a player feels. Every single player kind of approach the problem a little differently. Some people might do ways a certain things, while others might approach the problem a little differently. So how do you make players overall feels fun? How do you make the game feel fun for everyone who might be playing your game differently? Well, you control the mechanics and therefore the dynamic instead. The mechanics are the most basic component of the games. It is the rules. It is the basic action that a player can take. In this particular case, this is going to be the Nilou passive, where it restricts you to doing Dendro and Hydro characters. And of course, that mechanics limit the dynamics that the player approach the problem with. In this case, the mechanics of only allowing you to run Nilou with Hydro and Dendro characters kind of open and closes a few doors here and there and make you approach the team drafting process a little differently. And to be honest, it certainly did, which is why we are having this discussion to begin with, and that's why the community is having a overall discussion. It's because the mechanics changes the overall dynamic that we're approaching, and with that, it changes how the aesthetics are being felt by the players. Essentially, the aesthetic that Mihoyo want to present to the general public player is that Nilou is a character that works really well with Dendro and Hydro. It is very simple. It has a very clear use case. You want to put her into your Hydro and Dendro's character together to maximize her passive. Mihoyo want to convey a very clear message about Nilou, especially to the casual player who might not be consuming social media like YouTube or Genshin Impact guy like Jingbing guy, Styles guy. You want to put Nilou into your Bloom team, especially with Dendro and Hydro characters, as she is a character that specializes in Bloom. Now, of course, that unfortunately is not a gameplay decision design that we might agree with, but it's the one that they decided to do, and they unfortunately might have paid a unnecessarily huge cost to achieve that, which is restricting the overall character's team and therefore meta string for those of us who do care about the meta. One of the most common comparison that I've seen, especially within the Chinese community right now, is actually Shenhe, where Shenhe is a specialized crowd support and Nilou is much more like a specialized Bloom support. Both of these work in a very exact scenarios, and that's the way Mihoyo want to use these characters. Unfortunately, of course, the biggest difference was that when Shenhe was released, we already have really established crowd team, and especially more importantly, established good crowd DPS that can work really well with Shenhe. And I'm talking about characters like Ganyu, characters like Ayaka. Both of these characters were released before the Shenhe. both of these characters have established crowd team that we know will work with Shenhe. And so by the time Shenhe got released, it was clear what to do with Shenhe and where to put Shenhe in and how she might affect the overall dynamic when it comes to your account. Unfortunately, this is not really the case with Nilou, which is one of the reasons why she feels terrible right now. It's because we don't have good dendro characters, or even just dendro characters in general. We only have 2 to 3 dendro characters like Tegnari, Travelers, and Collies, and it really just feels terrible when it comes down to a passive that restricts you. Imagine if Shenhe has a passive that say, if you include at least 1 other crowd characters in your team that do these, it honestly wouldn't really change the character power level at all. It would be the exact same characters. This character would be played for the most part in the exact same way, but it could lead to different little aesthetics. It could lead to player making different decisions, especially for a casual player who once again doesn't really consume guides or social media content. If you include a passive in Shenhe that say, by running her with a different crowd characters, you get all these bonuses, then a casual player might look at that and be like, oh, I really want to run her with a different crowd characters. Got it, Mihoyo, let me do that real quick. And from there, you can kind of once again see how that's tied into the previous discussion that we have when it comes down to MDA or mechanic dynamic aesthetics. By introducing a very small adjustment to the mechanics that you should include a second crowd characters into your party, it does changes the way player approach the problem, which is the aesthetic. So what do I overall feel about Nilou's game design? To be honest, I actually think Nilou is one of the best designed characters in Genshin Impact until the passive existed. Nilou was designed in a really unique way that really changes the way player approach the problem, and it certainly did. Nilou was able to modify basic elemental reaction in Genshin Impact, which was the bloom reaction, and it kind of changes how we see the game and approach the problem. And I can see Mihoyo kind of taking this direction in future character as well, with certain characters modifying your electro plus crowd reaction, with certain characters modifying your dendro plus power reaction. And once again, this kind of looped into the overall discussion. When you changes a mechanic like this, it changes the dynamic and therefore the aesthetics. In this case, I think Nilou did the job really well. My main problem is that in return, it just costs so much that it makes Nilou a terrible characters to play in the end due to this passive right here. I mean, they could easily have changed this passive up to encourage you to play her in this playstyle instead of restricting you to playing her in this playstyles. Maybe something like for each Hydro and Dendro characters you include in your passive, increase your bloom damage. When you have exactly all of them, convert your bloom into core to do even more powerful damage. In that case, maybe it'll be a little bit better. Maybe it'll make her less restrictive. It will still allow you to play something like Hyper Bloom, Virgin, I don't know. Ultimately though, switching gear into talking about meta again, I do think that this passive that restrict her into only being in a certain team or 2 dramatically affected her overall release meta string. As the core problem right now is that while Nilou could be a good character, Nilou team sucks. Maybe it'll get better with futures release, maybe it'll get better with futures Dendro and Hydro, we don't really know, but at the current moment, this passive is a problem if you're looking at it from a overall power level, and that is unfortunate. That's pretty much what I want to talk about today and how Nilou's biggest problem is her gameplay design. Let me know what you think about the discussion we have in this video. Maybe even just you learn a little bit there and here and you want to comment on it, and so feel free to do so as well. It does help out with the YouTube algorithm a little bit, and of course if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks so much.